right, so we are going to start talking about muscles. There are about 600 human skeletal muscles. They constitute about half of our body weight. And there are 3 kinds of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. They are specialized for one major purpose, and that is converting the chemical energy in ATP into a mechanical energy of motion, right? Muscles help us move. And myology is the study of the muscular system. Muscles have several functions. One of them is movement. They move us from place to place. They also aid us in breathing and our circulation, and eating and digestion, defecation, urination, and childbirth. They play a role in communication, right? Our mouth moves and allows us to speak or to write. Our hands move. And they also play a role in nonverbal communications, because sometimes we make faces or we have, body gestures that convey how we're feeling. They also play a role in stability. They maintain our posture by preventing unwanted movements. And there are anti-gravity muscles that resist the pull of gravity and prevent us from falling or slumping over. They stabilize our joints. And they also control our openings and passageways. There are special muscles called sphincters, and they are muscular rings that control the movement of our food, bile, blood, and other materials. They also deal in heat production. And I see that's a little cut off there, but it's as much as 85% of our body heat can come from our skeletal muscles. There are some connective tissues within our muscle. There is what we call the endomysium, and this is a thin sleeve of loose connective tissue that surrounds each muscle fiber. This allows room for the capillaries and the nerve fibers to reach each muscle fiber. We also have a perimysium. This is a slightly thicker layer of connective tissue, and it deals with the fascicles, which are bundles of muscle fibers that are wrapped in this perimysium. This area then carries larger nerves and blood vessels and stretch receptors. There is also an epimysium, and this is a fibrous sheath surrounding the entire muscle. The outer surface grades into the fascia, and the inner surface sends projections between the fascicles to form the perimysium. And then we have the fascia, and this is a sheet of connective tissue that separates neighboring muscles or muscle groups from each other and the subcutaneous tissue. This is a microscopic view of a muscle and is showing you all the different connective tissues that I just discussed. CS is cross section, LS is longitudinal section. All right, then depending on how these fascicles are oriented, that gives the muscle a certain way to work. So the strength of the muscle and the direction of its pull are determined by the orientation of its fascicles. And there are several different types. And as you look through the muscles of the body, you will start to be able to recognize which ones are parallel or triangular or circular. Okay? So depending on how they look and they're organized, basically allows them to function in a certain way. So here is one example of each, and then you are given an example in the body where you would find that. So the triangular is found in the pectoralis major. And the circular, they're saying here, is your orbicularis oculi, which is your eye. It almost looks like an eye, doesn't it? Okay, so this is just getting into that a little bit deeper. You could kind of see this from the way the muscle is set up, but physiform muscles are thick in the middle and tapered at the ends. It's giving you two examples here. You have parallel muscles, and those are uniform width and parallel fascicles. They can span longer distances than other shapes. So they are like long muscles, if you will. There are triangular or convergent muscles. These are more of a fan-shaped, with a being broad at the origin and tapering to a narrower insertion. There are pinnate muscles. These are where we find fascicles that insert obliquely on a tendon. So they're kind of feather-shaped, and they can be singular, bi, or multi-pinnate. And then you have circular muscles, and those are your sphincters. And these literally form a ring around a body opening. Then we have muscle attachments. You can have either an indirect attachment or a direct attachment, and we need to know what the difference is. When you have an indirect attachment to a bone, you have a tendon that is bridging the gap between the muscle ends and the bony attachment. So you have a tendon connecting the muscle to the bone. This is usually done with a collagen fiber, and it then continues into the tendon. From there, it leads into the periosteum and the matrix of the bone. It is a very strong structural continuity from the muscle to the bone. One of the examples given here is your Achilles tendon. This is in your ankle. You may have known someone who has snapped their Achilles tendon and had to have it repaired. It does happen. All right, then we have an aponeurosis, which is a tendon when it's a broad or flat sheet. And you also can have a retinaculum. And this is a connective tissue band that tendons from separate muscles can pass under. Now, if you have a direct, or sometimes called a fleshy attachment, it means there is no tendon playing a role. So there is a little small space of separation between the muscle and the bone. And the muscle seems to emerge almost directly from the bone. And your brachialis and your triceps bronchi are two examples of this. There are some skeletal muscles that do not insert into bone, but into the dermis of the skin. And this is many muscles that we see when we're talking about our facial expressions. Okay, and now we're going to talk about origins and insertions. An origin is the bony attachment at the stationary end of the muscle. The insertion is the bony attachment to the mobile end of the muscle. And in the middle, you have what's called the belly, which is the thicker middle region of the muscle between the origin and insertion. So each muscle has a point of origin and a point of insertion. And then we have what are called functional groups of muscles. These are basically some terms, some definitions that you need to be aware of. The action is the effects produced by a muscle. It is either to produce or prevent a movement. And then you have a prime mover, which is an agonist, and this is a muscle that produces most of the force during a joint action. The synergist is the muscle that helps or aids the prime mover. It stabilizes the nearby joint and modifies the direction of movement. And then you have an antagonist, and this one opposes or goes against the prime mover. It relaxes to give the prime mover control over an action, and it deals with preventing excessive movement and injury. There are also antagonistic pairs, and those are muscles that act on opposite sides of a joint. And then you can have a fixator, and this is a muscle that prevents movement of bone. So this is giving you an example of those terms I just mentioned in relation to your elbow. The prime mover is the brachialist. The synergist is the biceps bronchi. The antagonist is the triceps bronchi. And the fixator, the muscle that holds the scapula, which is in your back, your back, kind of right off your shoulder. The fixator that holds that firmly in place is the rhomboid. So lots of different muscles play a role in one action or one movement. There are also intrinsic and extrinsic muscles. Intrinsic muscles are entirely contained within a region, such as the hand. Both the origin and the insertion are there in that one area, whereas extrinsic muscles act on a designated region, but they have their origins elsewhere. For instance, the fingers. They are extrinsic muscles that happen in the forearm. And that brings us to the conclusion of our first Introduction to Muscles lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions.